In this video, I will be speaking about death and about also being born. And I will speak about it in a particular way, which is made possible because I have embodied language. So, first of all, just for those who haven't listened to any of my previous videos, I want to let people who listen to me know that there is, of course, a difference between talking while you listen to yourself, like I do, and talking in which you do not listen to yourself and in which you hope that other people will listen to you, or in which you try to get other people to listen to you. Yeah. Or in which you, yeah, there's another way of talking in which you are ending up, yeah, listening to other people, because most of the talking that you find yourself involved in, if you haven't noticed, is actually a talking in which other people do the talking. Yeah, most people are actually, in terms of talking, listeners, and there are only very few people who do all the talking. And so there's a reason for that, because only a few of us can win the struggle for attention, and that's why only a few people do all the talking and most people are listening. So most people are just listening to other people, yeah, to put it squarely, while very few do the talking. And those who do the talking, of course, they try to get other people to listen to them. And that's their whole objective. Well, if you have embodied language, you step out of that pattern. You have embodied language like I do because you don't care whether other people listen to you or not. You are not busy listening to other people. No, you're busy listening to yourself. And you are talking with yourself. You are the one who's doing the talking, and you are talking with yourself, and you're listening to yourself. So that's very different from disembodied language, in which other people are more important than you, and therefore you try to get them to listen to you, or you are listening to them. Yeah, but you're not listening to yourself in disembodied language. That's what everybody is involved in. So when you hear me have embodied language, you're listening to someone who's listening to himself. And I'm talking with myself. And so now you have a bit of a, yeah, you could say, basis, a bit of background for understanding what I'm going to talk with you about, which I'm going to do shortly. Yeah, I'm going to talk about death, and I'm going to talk about being born. So let's just first address being born. In my perspective, birth, as we know it, in terms of a mother giving birth to a baby, of course, it is an enormously important event because a new human being comes into this world, and I don't dismiss any of that. But when I talk about birth, I'm not talking about that kind of birth. I'm talking about the birth which occurs when you begin to speak with yourself and listen to yourself. You are truly coming online, so to speak. Yeah, that's just a way of saying. But you become conscious of yourself when you, for the first time, hear yourself talk with yourself in the way that you want to talk, in the way that you like it, in the way that you appreciate it, in the way that your talking with yourself is meaningful. And so when you discover what it is like to have embodied language, as opposed to your usual way of talking, in which you were not listening to yourself, in which you were not talking with yourself in order to be able to listen to yourself, In disembodied language, you were not in touch with yourself. You were disconnected from yourself, dissociated from yourself. So you are born, in my view, when you begin to talk with yourself and listen to yourself. That is when you become conscious of your language, of how your language actually works. And that is when you begin to use your language to your own advantage. That's when your language, your embodied language, it will be to your advantage, because now with your embodied language you say to yourself what is true. And because you say to yourself what is true, you hear yourself say that, you instruct yourself with that, you basically decrease your old conditioning with disembodied language, and you predict your own future with your embodied language, in which you keep having the positive outcomes which you tell yourself about while you are having embodied language. So it is definitely, you could say, a rebirth of sorts, if you want to call it that. I would just call it birth, because unless you have embodied language instead of disembodied language, you just remain in the grip of the way in which you were conditioned, and you never become a conscious human being, which means a free individual. You are not free. You are impaired by your conditioning history. You are, you could say, imprisoned by the way you were taught, the way you were conditioned, and you have never had the conversation with yourself about what works for you and who you actually are. And not who you want to be, by the way, because who you want to be is a reaction to how you were expected to be. And who you are has nothing to do with who you want to be. Because when you are who you are with your embodied language, you're not trying to be anything. You are just who you are. And there's just no argument, there's no time lost with anything about being yourself, because you are yourself with your embodied language. Only, of course, as long as your embodied language can continue. Because the moment your embodied language stops again, which is bound to happen, because that is your conditioning history with disembodied language, which then takes over again, you basically die. That's what I would consider death. You basically disappear, in a sense that you're not really here anymore. You're not really present anymore in your life. You become carried away by your own language, by your own so-called beliefs, which has also got to do with your assumption about inner language, that there is language inside of you, which is not true. There is no language inside of you. But with your disembodied language, you believe in that, and you are again and again overtaken by the false notion, by the fantasy of inner language, which you then call your mind, your thinking, your inner private speech that you have with yourself, which is just all part of your fantasy, which occurs again in reaction to your disembodied language that you've been involved in so long. But embodied language is not a reaction to your disembodied language. Embodied language means the absence of your disembodied language. So it's only when disembodied language has stopped that you can have embodied language. So it is only when you have temporarily died to your disembodied language that you are again born into embodied language. And yes, there will be a first time in which this happens, and then you will again and again, as you catch yourself not listening to yourself while you speak, as you catch yourself having the conversation with yourself in which you again manage to listen to yourself while you speak, you are again born, and you are renewed again. You are replenished. You are feeling so grateful that it is possible to step out of your conditioning history with disembodied language. Yes, that is what is going to happen if you manage to continue with your embodied language, which means you manage to stop your disembodied language. Yeah. But I also want to link the death, which I describe as your participation in disembodied language. I want to also link that mechanical behavior in which you act out of your conditioning history because you were not conditioned to have, as I have, embodied language. You were conditioned to have disembodied language. So I want to link your participation in disembodied language with death as an organism. When you die, when a human being dies, obviously there's no more movement, there's no more language, the person is gone. Now, I want you to just listen to me and recognize that when you have disembodied language, you are not really present. You are not listening to yourself. You disappear, but you disappear while you're still here. Your body is still alive. Your body is actually saying, I am alive. What are you doing? Your body is protesting against your disembodied language, which makes it seem as if you're dead, as if you're not really here. Your language is dead, but your body is alive. That's a conflict. And this is why, you are permanently in conflict with yourself as you engage in disembodied language. Once you begin to listen to yourself, which means once you begin to talk with yourself in order to be able to listen to yourself, once you say to yourself the things which matter to you, which you are able to say, which you want to say, which you can say, which you enjoy saying, which give you energy, which sound good, which establishes a sense of well-being in you, where you realize like, wow, why didn't I do this before? Well, you didn't do this before because you were continuing with your disembodied language. And you can only do this if you stop your disembodied language, understand what it is and stop it, because it has to do with the fact that you weren't listening to yourself. Now you're listening to yourself. You can continue with your embodied language. And you experience how you are born into a new reality, which you are yourself now describing. You are describing what is happening to you as you are continuing on with your embodied language. And as I have said in many of my videos before, which I hope you will also listen to, your ongoing embodied language is your language enlightenment. So you are continuously renewed. You are continuously reborn into the next moment, into the next experience, into the next realization, into the next formulation of who you are, into the next perspective of who you can be if you keep on moving with your embodied language, if you keep on expressing your embodied language. And obviously, even though I'm sitting here by myself, talking out loud with myself, because there's nobody else here, even though I let you listen to how I talk with myself, of course, I could also talk with you in this way. And you could also talk with me in this way. And that is when we will have embodied language together. However, as you may have heard me say before, and as I will continue to remind people of, I will not be available for this whole year 2025, in which I have basically said no. I have been trying to reach other people long enough to come to this conclusion that something else is needed, and I'm just going to have, for a whole year, embodied language by myself. I know what it is like. I know that I feel disturbed in my embodied language because you cannot carry on with it. I know that you are, as you are, incapable of meeting me in embodied language. It has been proven over and over again that this is the case. And this has, you could say, illustrated to me that something else is needed. You could say I have been frustrated about it. And you could say there is some truth to that. But I'm not the kind of person to be frustrated about anyone's disembodied language. To me, my life is about embodied language, and I always continue with that. So I am just always happy whatever my embodied language brings to me. And so in this case, I'm happy to report to anyone who is willing to listen to this that I'm doing fine on my own. I don't need to have my embodied language with you, which you, out of habit, are going to disturb again, which you are not able to keep up with. You are not able to have it with me. That's what has happened. You have basically chickened out. You have basically declined. You have basically distrusted me. You have basically avoided what this is, as a possibility. You have basically postponed your own ability to have embodied language. You've endlessly done that because you could have already had this many, many years ago. I mean, I've been only talking about this for the last 45 years, and many people have met me as my students. I've taught psychology for 9.5 years, or as mental health clients. I have worked in mental health for all these years. I've studied psychology for many, many years, so I've been part of academia for many years, and yet nobody has risen to the level of being able to continuously engage with me in embodied language. Nobody has actually made the click that, oh, I really only want to continue with embodied language. Somehow, at some point, for everybody, disembodied language presumably was again more important. And that's how they carried on with their disembodied language and forgot about embodied language. Well, I haven't. I am here to tell you that I haven't. And you can still have it, but you will have to be on your own for the duration of 2025 before I'm willing to consider to talk with anyone who will then have to show to me that indeed they are capable of having embodied language with me, or with others. Because it's very easy to pretend that you are having embodied language, and that's what people, of course, with their disembodied language have been doing forever. Everybody pretends. They don't call it that, but everybody pretends that they are already having embodied language when in fact they don't. I can hear that, I can feel that, I can sense that, and I know what embodied language is. I have discovered when I was about 21 years old or so, I discovered that I could listen to myself, and I've been doing that ever since. Yeah, ever since I discovered this. And my life has just, over time, taken on the, yeah, the wonderful turns that it could only take because I have embodied language. So, having said all this, I want to continue to talk with you about also the death which occurs with embodied language. Because embodied language, it allows us to let go of our words. It allows us to let go of our language. And actually it is wrong to say this, because there is no inner language, so there is no let go of language. There's only when you speak, when there is language, and then when you don't speak, then there is no language. And you could also say, okay, I can write about this, yeah, or I can keyboard about this and write something on my I don't know, some document and send it to somebody or so. But you can write and read about it, but it's only observable language, yeah. It's written, it can be read, it is said, and it can be listened to. That's when language is there. When there, yeah, when, I mean, I have, I just want to show you something here. I'm just going to turn the camera around. I have this behind, I have my phone on this music stand, and this music stand has a binder here with the songs that I've been singing lately. And as you can see, this writing was done by me, but when I am looking at my phone, I'm not seeing this writing. I cannot, that language is not really there on these pages, even though it's right next to it, but I cannot see it because I'm just looking at myself. Yeah. And likewise, in embodied language, there's no sense of any language if I do not speak, if I do not write. There's just no language. There's absence of language. And that is death. That is the same death, but now you are alive, experiencing what death is without language. And so, if you can experience this while alive, isn't that wonderful? To experience that sense that there is no language, and that what was said, it doesn't dissolve into nothingness. No, there's no dissolving actually happening. You just stop talking. Yeah. And there was no language to begin with inside of you that comes outside. There was never any language inside of you. There's only language when you say it, when you speak it, when you write it, when you read it, when you hear it. And then when there is nothing said, when there is nothing to be read, there is no language. And you can say there's silence. Yeah, there's the absence of language. And very important to recognize this, the absence of language which does not make it impossible for you to express yourself. To the contrary, it invites you to express yourself again and again. It makes it possible to fully express yourself and to say exactly what you want to say. Yeah. It is so magnificent to experience being without language after you have said everything you had wanted to say, you were able to say. And after you've understood what you could only understand because you said it, because you heard it, because you wrote it, because you've read it. And because in this case, yeah, I'm now talking about my songs, because you sang it, yeah. And because you wrote that text to that song. Mm. So it's another perspective on death which makes death into something tremendously fulfilling, tremendously blissful. And again, always connected with being born into this newness of your language. Because I'm still here, I'm still alive, I can keep talking, I can keep having embodied language. In my disembodied language, where a person doesn't listen to him or herself, that person is still alive, and yet their language is dead. Their language is not alive. That is when we are arguing, that is when we are fighting, that's when we are fleeing, that's when we're stressing out, when we're worrying, whether we are scattered and fragmented and we're all over the place, we're running around in circles. Our language is mechanical. We cannot be free. We are repeating the same pattern over and over again. And yes, our lives are getting more and more entrenched. Our lives are getting more and more imprisoned. Our lives are getting, we're walking on such a narrow path. We're so not alive. Our bodies are still alive, but our language, it takes the very life out of us. The disembodied language in which we do not listen to ourselves. The disembodied language which does not allow the new to be said, to be heard, to be informed by. You are alive, which means you are every moment new, and yet your language does not in any way reflect it in disembodied language. So you are going indeed with your language against your body. And when you embody your language, you hear your sound, you feel that this is the sound you want to have, this is the sound that you would like to speak with. This is how you can actually begin to make sense of what's going on for you in your life. This is how you are born into being you. This is how you're born in who you have always been and who you can continue to be with your embodied language. And this is then how you are born into your language enlightenment. And yeah, that is a realistic perspective. There's no fantasy involved. I'm not fantasizing about what I'm saying to myself when I'm not speaking, or what I'm going to write when I'm not writing. I'm not having any ideas. There are no ideas. I'm not having any thoughts about what I'm going to say before I speak. Do you get that? Thoughts, which presumably determine how I speak, do not occur in embodied language. In embodied language, there's just silence. There's silence before I speak, and there's silence after I've spoken. And my speech makes it more available that I have access to my self-nature, which is silence. And my self-nature is, of course, also including the fact that I'm a mortal. The fact that this body that I have, one day it it will die. Just like I will stop talking at some point, I cannot just go on talking forever. I mean, even while alive, yeah, there's moments in which I talk and in which I don't talk. I mean, maybe I get tired, or maybe I need to do some things, or I will carry on with something else. Yeah. So there are always moments while alive in which I do not talk, in which I'm not busy with language. I'm doing something else. I'm playing basketball, for instance. Yeah. Or I'm eating an ice cream. I'm just saying, or playing my ukulele. Yeah. And not singing a song. I'm just strumming the strings, and I just like to hear the sound of these chords. Yeah. So then there is no language. And then my expression with my language, with my embodied language, will make it so enjoyable to not have language. However, when you have had disembodied language and there is no language, when you're not busy with language, it is very uncomfortable to not have language. And that is why you go on this weird kind of fantasy about what you had supposedly wanted to say, or what's important to you, or there's all these things, and it sort of just co-occurs with this fantasy that you have inner language. And then everything that wasn't said, that could be said but which was never said, or it was never said correctly, that you were never completing what you actually wanted to say. You never listened to yourself sufficiently enough to be able to say what you wanted to say, to hear yourself, to understand yourself. You are inevitably going to have that fantasy of inner language. This is what human beings have had ever since. And why did they continue with this inner fantasy of who they are, who they want to be, or who they believe to be? It's all based on fear. Because as long as you are not in a situation like I am, as long as you are not in a situation in which you are not threatened, you're not feeling distracted, you're not on the run, you're not trying to prove anything to anybody, you're not fighting with anybody for someone's attention, you're not fighting with yourself to get your own attention, you're just sitting talking with yourself, and you're just hearing yourself, and you are just enjoying yourself. That's when you have embodied language. So, embodied language happens by itself in the circumstances that it is possible for it to happen. And you know, because of your exploration about the difference between disembodied language and your embodied language, you know what are the circumstances in which it can and will occur. And so you create these circumstances just like I am creating these circumstances for myself. I could also create this together with you, but only to the extent that you are able to create this for yourself, to the extent that I know more about this than you do, to the extent that I do more of this than you do, you are basically making it impossible for me to continue with this. So if at the end of 2025, at 2026, if you consider yourself to be a person who is during this year, this is now February, so you still got quite a couple of months to begin your exploration. If you consider yourself to be the person who is able to talk with me, well then make yourself known, and then we will talk, and then I will I will have a conversation with you in which we will have embodied language. And then most likely our conversation will continue till the point where you are, yeah, it is bound to happen, where you are unable to continue with it. And at that point, I will just say, okay, we got to leave it here now. And then I will see you back again in a year. Yeah. Or something like that. What else can I do? I mean, I'm not going to waste my time on your disembodied language. I've done that already enough. And I'm not going to do that. So, yeah, I have to be strict about this. And this is only going to be for those people, those very few people who are capable and willing enough to be alive with me in their language and to then experience all this wonderful beauty that is created by our embodied language, our shared embodied language. Yeah. And okay, let's just also address this here for a second. You have heard about, I don't know, constructs such as, I don't know, a person's ego or a person's personality or a person's identity, all these things we have talked about. People have endlessly talked about that and about transcending your, I don't know, the sense of who you are and acquiring higher consciousness and all that kind of stuff. This, what I'm talking about, it cuts right through all of that. You are only going to be able to have embodied language. And there's no involvement at all in any kind of spiritual mumbo jumbo, psychological mumbo jumbo. None of that. Just simple embodied language. That's all there is. And yes, we could be scientific about it. We could be in the sense that, yeah, we could use our embodied language to, we could use it to have voice activated artificial intelligence with embodied language instead of, as we do now, voice activated artificial intelligence with disembodied language. Yeah, why shouldn't we, right? Of course we could. We could have education with embodied language. Of course we could. We could have government with embodied language. Of course we could. But are you going to do it? Are you going to step up and do it? That's what remains to be seen, or what remains to be listened to, yeah, because you are going to say for yourself whether you are doing it or not. And you are also going to be able to say for yourself, like, well, I guess I'm not doing it. I guess I am just continuing with my disembodied language. And this is why you are unhappy. This is why you remain dissatisfied. This is why you remain unfulfilled. This is why you have spiritual fantasies, yeah? This is why you adhere to all sorts of superstitions as some sort of a crutch, yeah? Also, you hang on to all sorts of idiotic ideas about an afterlife, yeah? So, all of that is involved in that. No, you don't need any of that when you have embodied language. I suddenly realize what a gift I have given myself to to have this whole year for myself. It's just marvelous how how that has come about, and how my current experience of my embodied language is this, yeah, this beautiful. I sang a song this morning, which you can hear, a beautiful Gaelic song, which had the word beautiful in it. It is called Elaine. Elaine, that is Gaelic for beautiful, wonderful. This is a nice moment to leave it here for now.